This is Bahar, the farthest moon orbiting the greater sphere. Once home to the fabled E2 civilization, it is a veritable paradise, boasting a level of biodiversity that at times rivaled the ecosystems of the overgrowth. Settled by the Arjan people around 1100 IC, nearly 3,000 years before the Phaselander expeditions, it has now become the largest and most densely populated center of civilization known throughout the spheres, with the Bahari hierarchy serving as its primary form of governance. Today, however, we are visiting Bahar to observe an ecosystem situated in the most extreme environment on the Moon, the northern continent of Imlankar. In the year 3823 IC, during a deep survey of the northernmost continent of Bahar, a research commission, serving under the organization known as the Sunghan Geological Society, discovered the first living specimens of the composite organisms we know today as the hydrolithic Cetrotia. Found in basins that form along the edges of a volcanic belt, stretching approximately 2,000 kilometers across the continent, the colony thrived in a cold and dry environment. Here, starlight can become exceedingly rare, with the region experiencing seasons of near total darkness, for a period lasting almost 200 days. Imposed upon this already extreme climate is the elliptical orbit of the Moon, causing brief temperature changes through the tidal and radiating influence of the greater sphere. While collecting mineral samples along a previously inaccessible basin, we came upon a congregation of organisms we had initially mistaken for the remains of an undiscovered E2 settlement. Rising 20 to 40 meters from the ground and heavily carapaced, the colony of towers posed an eerie silhouette against the glow that emanated from the greater sphere. Standing roughly 100 meters away on a distant slope, we observed the colony for any signs of motile capabilities. But after a duration of 2 hours, the organisms remained unresponsive. Not knowing whether they were a carnivorous form of composite organism, we approached, in increments of 20 meters for every half an hour. It was a slow, meticulous process, but a necessary precaution we were more than happy to take. Thermal readings of the colony and the surrounding area presented considerable temperature differences, with the internal structures of the largest specimens reaching temperatures above -5 degrees Celsius, while the ambient air ranged between -40 degrees to -70 degrees Celsius. The towers, it would seem, were exhibiting strange, almost geological properties. After the initial encounter, the research commission spent the next year documenting the life of the hydrolithic Cetrotia, and along the way, discovered the biomes the colonies relied upon and equally supported. What followed was the observation of an individual tower, affectionately named Molph, over the course of a typical cycle. The subject, at the beginning of the observation, was approximately 32 meters tall, with an estimated diameter of 15 to 18 meters. The pronounced segmentation and heavy mineralization of its carapace pointed to the colony being in its early to middle stages of maturity. On the onset of increased illumination, the subject entered a metabolic reactivation phase, where the water processing organisms it hosts formed photosynthetic domes along the middle section of the tower. Internal monitoring showed a slight increase of activity as nutrient processing fluids were cycled through the various compartments of the colony. Shortly after, basal structures embedded in the volcanic substrate began their mineral uptake, providing the subject essential minerals, such as magnesium-rich compounds. At this point, signs of structural growth were observed through discrete expansion along the pre-existing segments of the tower. Through continuous exposure to starlight, the subject achieved the complete reactivation of its metabolic system, allowing it to sustain a full cycle of growth. Characterized by distinct pulses of metabolic activity, new segmentation was observed around the middle section of the tower. Approximately 60 days into the season, the water-processing organisms reached maximum density within their domed structures. By the 110th day, they had expanded beyond the dome, as a thin, continuous film that covered 70% the tower's external surface area. We believed that this was an attempt to maximize their energy output, while also acting as a layer of insulation for the colony. Signaled by this abundant growth, and the continuous melting of frost, a whole host of organisms emerged from the volcanic substrate. Among them were several species of short-lived strideriforms that fed on the water-processing organisms, and a single species of highly motile cetrotia that hunted them. Around the same time, the subject began modifying its internal structure, creating partially enclosed chambers, where the hydrogen byproducts of the colony are cycled inward and drawn into metallic lattices, in a process that seems almost geological in nature. As starlight began to fade, the activity within the subject's lattice-producing chambers grinded to a halt as they reached maximum observed capacity. Minor fractures were also found propagating along the basal segments of the tower. At the same time, the subject's partner species retreated within the domed structures. Not long after, the population of organisms which benefited from their growth reverted into their dormant states, while others left behind clutches of eggs that would endure through the season. On the onset of continuous darkness, ambient temperatures dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. At this stage, the subject's domed structures receded inward, ceasing all photosynthetic activity, and solidifying into non-translucent layers of carapace. Thermal activity, however, continued within its internal structure. The magnesium-based lattices it had created are cycled through processing chambers, where they are exposed to highly specialized enzymes that facilitate the controlled release of hydrogen. Not only providing the colony a means to regulate internal temperatures, but also a resource its symbiotic partners can utilize, and in turn, sustain the rest of the colony through the cold and dark season. During the examination of the subject's internal processes, the fractures that had formed along the basal segments of the tower violently erupted. Fragments of its carapace and pod-like masses were sent hurtling across the basin. I and 2 other members of the crew suffered several cuts and bruises across our dermal plating. What followed, however, was a discovery that we all agreed more than made up for the shocking experience. Upon closer inspection of the pods, we found that they carried the developmental stages of the colony. The forces at which they were sent hurtling across the basin embedded them through the snow and in the upper layers of substrate, where they laid dormant and eventually emerged as drones at the height of the seasonal illumination. These drones, we realized, were the same species of cetrotia previously observed hunting the strideriforms. Those that survived through the season would go on to find suitable partners and merge into genetically distinct colonies of their own. Following the discovery and observation of the hydrolithic cetrotia, the Bahari hierarchy hosted a long and tense deliberation regarding the remarkably stable hydride alloys found within the composite organisms. Against the objection of the Sunghan Geological Society and several other research organizations, the hierarchy and its constituent polities authorized the harvesting of the living hydroliths as an alternative source of energy, a decision that remains a highly criticized and contentious matter among the Bahari people. Although many have argued that the shift ultimately prevented the wider environmental degradation of Bahar and significantly reduced the prevalence of petrified alloys sourced from the extinct relatives of hydroliths, the harm inflicted upon the living colonies and their habitats was far too deep and lingering. It was not until the year 4000 IC, nearly 2 centuries later, that a conservation effort led by the Sunghan Geological Society succeeded in preserving the last remaining colonies of the species. while a research organization, commissioned by the hierarchy, successfully cultivated the first domesticated strain of the hydrolithic Cetrotia.